I want a divorce, Hannah. Ethan's voice crackled through the phone, each syllable like a shard of glass. My breath caught in my throat as I stood in the middle of the kitchen, dinner half prepared on the counter. The smell of garlic and onions hung in the air, but all I could focus on was the venom in his words. "What did you say?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "You heard me," he spat. "I'm done. I'm sick of this. I'm sick of you." I gripped the edge of the counter, my knuckles turning white. "Ethan, we need to talk about this. You can't just—" "There's nothing to talk about," he interrupted. "I've already made up my mind. I'm moving out tonight." The line went dead, leaving me standing in stunned silence. I stared at the phone, my mind racing. This couldn't be happening. Not like this. Not after everything I had done to keep this family together. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. Ethan had always been impulsive, but this was a new low. I had to act fast. I grabbed my car keys and drove to his office, my heart pounding in my chest. As I walked through the glass doors, the receptionist gave me a sympathetic look. She must have heard the shouting from his office. I pushed open the door without knocking. Ethan was sitting at his desk, packing his things into a box. He didn't even look up when I walked in. "Ethan, we need to talk," I said, my voice firm. He finally looked up, his eyes cold and distant. "There's nothing to talk about, Hannah. I've made up my mind." "Why now? Why like this?" I demanded, my voice trembling with anger. "After everything we've been through, you owe me an explanation." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I'm tired, Hannah. Tired of pretending. Tired of this life. I want something different. And what about me? What about our life together?" I asked, my voice breaking. He shrugged, his indifference like a slap in the face. "You'll be fine. You're strong. You'll get through this." I felt a surge of anger, hot and fierce. "You don't get to just walk away, Ethan. You don't get to make this decision on your own." He stood up, his face hardening. "I already have. I'm leaving tonight. You can keep the house. I don't care." I stared at him, my mind reeling. This was it. The end of everything I had worked so hard to build. But as I looked at him, I realized something. This wasn't the end. It was a beginning. A chance to finally break free from the chains that had been holding me back. "Fine," I said, my voice steady. "If that's what you want, then go. But don't expect me to be waiting for you when you change your mind." He looked at me, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. "You really mean that?" "Yes," I said, my voice firm. "I'm done being your doormat, Ethan. I'm done letting you control my life. If you want a divorce, then that's what you'll get." For a moment, he just stared at me, his expression unreadable. Then he picked up his box and walked past me without another word. I watched him go, a strange sense of relief washing over me. As I walked back to my car, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. This was my chance to start over, to build a life that was truly my own. And I was going to take it. When I got home, I sat down at the kitchen table and started making a list. I needed to find a lawyer, figure out the finances, and start planning for my future. It was daunting, but I felt a sense of determination I hadn't felt in years. This was my moment, my chance to take control of my life and create something new. And I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. The next morning, I sat in the lawyer's office, the sterile smell of paperwork and coffee filling the air. My head was still spinning from the events of the previous day. Ethan's words echoed in my mind, but I pushed them aside. I needed to focus. "Mrs. Thompson, I understand this is a difficult time for you," Mr. Callahan, my lawyer, said gently. "But filing these papers is the first step towards taking control of your life." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I know. It's a lot to process." He handed me a pen. "Take your time. When you're ready, sign here." I took a deep breath and signed the papers, feeling a strange mix of fear and relief. This was real. There was no turning back now. As I left the office, my phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. "We need to talk. Meet me at the house." My heart sank. What now? I drove home, my mind racing with possibilities. When I arrived, Ethan was already there, pacing in the living room. His eyes were bloodshot, and he looked more disheveled than I'd ever seen him. "Hannah, what the hell are you doing?" he demanded as soon as I walked in. "I'm taking control of my life," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. He laughed bitterly. "Control? You think this is control? You're ruining everything." I crossed my arms, standing my ground. "No, Ethan. You ruined everything. I'm just picking up the pieces." He stepped closer, his face contorted with anger. "You think you can just walk away? You think you can just leave me?" "I don't think," I said, my voice firm. "I know." He grabbed my arm, his grip tight. "You don't get to make this decision alone, Hannah. We're in this together, whether you like it or not." I pulled away, my heart pounding. "Let go of me, Ethan." His eyes softened for a moment, and he released his grip. "Please, Hannah. Let's talk about this. We can fix it." I shook my head, tears welling up in my eyes. "No, Ethan. We can't. It's over." He slumped onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. "I don't know what to do," he whispered. "I can't lose you." I took a step back, my resolve hardening. "You already have." As I turned to leave, the front door opened, and Richard walked in, his presence filling the room. He looked between us, his expression unreadable. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice cold. "Ethan and I are getting a divorce," I said, my voice steady. Richard's eyes narrowed. "Is that so?" Ethan stood up, his face pale. "Dad, Save it," Richard snapped. "I've heard enough." He turned to me, his gaze piercing. "Hannah, are you sure this is what you want?" I nodded. "Yes, Richard. It's what I need." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Very well. But know this, Ethan. If you continue down this path, there will be consequences." Ethan's face twisted with anger. "What are you talking about?" Richard's expression hardened. "You're my son, but you've made a mess of your life. And if you drag Hannah down with you, I won't hesitate to cut you off. Do you understand?" Ethan's eyes widened in shock. "You can't be serious." "Oh, I'm very serious," Richard said, his voice like steel. "This is your last chance, Ethan. Don't waste it." With that, he turned and left, leaving us standing in stunned silence. I felt a strange sense of vindication, but also a new layer of tension. This wasn't just about Ethan and me anymore. Richard had thrown down the gauntlet, and the stakes were higher than ever. Ethan sank back onto the couch, his face ashen. "What have I done?" he whispered. I took a deep breath, feeling a mix of pity and resolve. "You've made your choices, Ethan. Now you have to live with them." As I walked out of the house, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. This was just the beginning, but I knew one thing for sure. I was ready for whatever came next. Returning from a week-long business trip, I felt a strange sense of anticipation and dread. The house, usually in some state of disarray thanks to Ethan's laziness, was spotless. The scent of lemon cleaner hung in the air, and everything was eerily in place. My heart pounded as I walked through the rooms, half expecting Ethan to jump out and confront me. On the dining table, a stack of papers caught my eye. Divorce papers, complete and signed by Ethan. I felt a mix of relief and apprehension. This was what I wanted, right? But the finality of it all was overwhelming. The doorbell rang, jolting me from my thoughts. I opened the door to find Ethan standing there, looking more put together than I had seen him in weeks. Behind him, Marianne stood, her face a mask of concern and anger. "We need to talk," Ethan said, pushing past me into the house. Marianne followed, her eyes scanning the room with disapproval. "Hannah, this is madness. You can't go through with this." I closed the door, my hands trembling. "It's already done, Marianne." Ethan signed the papers. Ethan turned to face me, his eyes pleading. "We can still fix this, Hannah. We can go to counseling, try to work things out." I shook my head, my resolve hardening. "No, Ethan. It's too late for that. I've made my decision." Marianne stepped forward, her voice rising. "This is all your fault, Hannah. You've driven him to this. You're tearing this family apart. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Marianne, this isn't about you. This is between Ethan and me. She scoffed, her eyes narrowing. Oh, don't be so naive. Everything you do affects this family. And don't think for a second that Richard won't take Ethan's side in this. Ethan's face paled. Mom, that's enough. But Marianne wasn't done. You think you can just walk away and keep your job at the company? Richard will see to it that you're out on the street. I felt a surge of anger. Is that a threat? It's a promise, Marianne said, her voice cold. Ethan stepped between us, his face strained. Mom, please. This isn't helping. Marianne glared at him. You need to fight for your marriage, Ethan. Don't let her ruin everything. I clenched my fists, my patience wearing thin. Ethan, if you want to save any shred of dignity, you'll leave now. Both of you. Ethan looked torn, but he nodded. Come on, Mom. Let's go. Marianne huffed but followed him out, casting one last venomous look my way. As the door closed behind them, I sank into a chair, my heart racing. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The next day at work, I tried to focus, but my mind kept drifting back to the confrontation with Ethan and Marianne. I was in the middle of a meeting when my phone buzzed with a message from Richard. See me in my office. Now. My stomach churned as I made my way to his office. Richard's stern expression did nothing to calm my nerves. Sit down, Hannah, he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. I sat, trying to steady my breathing. What is this about, Richard? He leaned back, his eyes cold. I've heard about the divorce, and I have to say I'm disappointed. I swallowed hard. I understand, but this is a personal matter. Personal? He scoffed. You're part of this family, and this affects all of us. But more importantly, it affects the company. I felt a flash of anger. With all due respect, Richard, my personal life shouldn't impact my professional capabilities. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. Don't be naive, Hannah. Everything affects everything. And let me be clear. If this divorce damages the company's reputation, there will be consequences. I met his gaze, refusing to back down. Are you threatening my job? He smiled, a cold, calculating smile. I'm simply stating the facts. Keep that in mind. As I left his office, my mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. Richard's veiled threat hung over me like a dark cloud. I had to be careful, but I also had to stand my ground. This was my life, and I wasn't going to let anyone control it. The stakes were higher than ever, and I knew I had to be prepared for whatever came next. The days following my confrontation with Richard were a whirlwind. I threw myself into work, determined to prove my worth despite the looming threats. But the tension was palpable, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to break. One evening, as I was wrapping up a late meeting, my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I hesitated but answered. Hannah, it's Marianne, came the cold voice on the other end. I sighed, bracing myself. What do you want, Marianne? We need to talk. Meet me at the cafe on 5th in an hour. Before I could respond, she hung up. I stared at the phone, my stomach churning. This couldn't be good. The cafe was nearly empty when I arrived. Marianne sat in a corner booth, her face pinched with worry. I slid into the seat across from her, my heart pounding. What's this about? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She leaned in, her eyes hard. Richard is planning to fire you, Hannah. He's just waiting for the right moment. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. Why are you telling me this? Because, she said, her voice trembling, he's planning to replace you with Ethan. I stared at her, stunned. Ethan? But he's been groveling, trying to win his father's favor back, Marianne interrupted. And Richard is considering it. He thinks it will save face for the family. I felt a surge of anger. So, you're warning me out of the goodness of your heart? She looked away, her expression conflicted. No, I'm warning you because I don't want Ethan to get hurt. He can't handle the pressure. And if he fails, Richard will destroy him. I took a deep breath, trying to process the information. What do you expect me to do? Fight back, she said, her eyes fierce. Prove to Richard that you're indispensable. Make it impossible for him to replace you. I shook my head, feeling overwhelmed. This is insane. Welcome to the family, she said bitterly. You either play the game or get crushed. As I left the cafe, my mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. Richard's plan to replace me with Ethan was a new low, even for him. I had to act fast, but I needed a strategy. The next day, I called an emergency meeting with my team. As we gathered in the conference room, I could feel the weight of their expectations. Thank you all for coming on such short notice. I began, trying to keep my voice steady. We have a critical project coming up, and I need everyone at their best. The team nodded, their faces determined. I outlined the project, emphasizing its importance to the company's future. As I spoke, I could see their confidence growing. This was my chance to prove my worth, not just to Richard but to myself. Over the next few weeks, we worked tirelessly, putting in long hours and pushing ourselves to the limit. The project was a massive success, and I felt a sense of pride and accomplishment. But the looming threat of Richard's plans still hung over me. One evening, as I was leaving the office, I received a call from Ethan. Hesitant, I answered. Hannah, we need to talk, he said, his voice strained. About what? I asked, my patience wearing thin. About the divorce, he replied. I want to make things right. I sighed, feeling a mix of frustration and pity. Ethan, it's too late for that. Please, just hear me out, he pleaded. Meet me at the house. Reluctantly, I agreed. When I arrived, Ethan was waiting on the porch, looking more vulnerable than I had ever seen him. Hannah, I know I've made mistakes, he began, his voice breaking. But I can't lose you. I'll do whatever it takes to make this work. I looked at him, feeling a surge of conflicting emotions. Ethan, this isn't just about us. Your father is planning to fire me and replace me with you. His eyes widened in shock. What? He can't do that. Oh, he can, I said bitterly. And he will, unless I prove my worth. Ethan slumped onto the porch steps, his face pale. I had no idea. Well, now you do, I said, my voice firm. So, what are you going to do about it? He looked up at me, a flicker of determination in his eyes. I'll talk to him. I'll make him see reason. I shook my head, feeling a mix of hope and skepticism. Good luck with that. As I walked away, I felt a strange sense of resolve. This was my fight, and I wasn't going to back down. The stakes were higher than ever, but I was ready. It was time to take control of my life, once and for all. The days blurred together as I threw myself into work, determined to solidify my position at the company. The looming threat of Richard's plan to replace me with Ethan hung over me like a dark cloud. I knew I had to stay one step ahead, but the pressure was immense. One afternoon, as I was reviewing reports in my office, my assistant, Claire, knocked and entered, her face pale. Hannah, you need to see this, she said, handing me a folder. I opened it to find a series of emails between Richard and the board members, discussing my potential replacement. My heart sank as I read the cold, calculated words. They were planning to announce my termination at the next board meeting. I felt a surge of panic but quickly pushed it down. I couldn't afford to lose my composure now. I needed a plan. Thank you, Claire, I said, my voice steady. Please, keep this between us for now. She nodded, her eyes filled with concern. Of course, Hannah. Let me know if there's anything else I can do. As she left, I sat back in my chair, my mind racing. I had to find a way to turn this around, to prove my indispensability before the board meeting. But how? That evening, I received a call from Ethan. Hesitant, I answered. Hannah, I talked to Dad, he said, his voice strained. And? I asked, holding my breath. He wouldn't listen, Ethan admitted. He said it's too late, that the decision has already been made. I felt a wave of despair. So, that's it? They're just going to replace me. No, Ethan said, his voice firm. I'm not giving up. I have an idea, but I need your help. What is it? I asked, my curiosity piqued. Meet me at the office tonight. I'll explain everything, he said before hanging up. I arrived at the office to find Ethan waiting in the lobby, a determined look on his face. He led me to a conference room, where he had set up a laptop and projector. "We need to show the board that you're irreplaceable," he began. "And the best way to do that is to present a plan that only you can execute." I frowned, skeptical. "And what plan is that?" He pulled up a presentation on the laptop. "I've been working on a proposal for a new project. It's ambitious, but if we can pull it off, it will secure your position and prove your value to the company." I scanned the proposal, impressed by the level of detail and innovation. "This is good, Ethan. Really good. But can we pull it off in time?" He nodded, his eyes filled with determination. "We have to. It's our only chance." We spent the next several days working tirelessly on the proposal, refining every detail and preparing for the board meeting. It was a strange feeling, working so closely with Ethan after everything that had happened. But in a way, it reminded me of why I had fallen in love with him in the first place. He was capable, driven, and, when he wanted to be, remarkably insightful. The day of the board meeting arrived, and I felt a mix of nervousness and resolve. This was it, our last chance to turn things around. As we entered the boardroom, Richard's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. The board members took their seats, and the room fell silent. Ethan and I presented our proposal, outlining the potential benefits and the unique skills I brought to the project. I could see the board members' interest peaking, their skepticism slowly melting away. When we finished, Richard stood up, his face a mask of controlled anger. "This is impressive," he admitted, his voice cold. "But it's not enough to change my decision." I felt a surge of panic, but Ethan stepped forward, his voice steady. "Dad, if you replace Hannah, you'll lose more than just an employee. You'll lose the respect of everyone in this room. She's proven her worth time and time again. This project is just the beginning." The board members murmured among themselves, and I could see their expressions shifting. Richard's face hardened, but he knew he was losing control of the narrative. Finally, one of the senior board members spoke up. "I agree with Ethan. Hannah has demonstrated exceptional leadership and vision. We should give her the chance to see this project through." Richard's jaw clenched, but he nodded reluctantly. "Very well. Hannah, you have my support for now. But know this, one misstep and you're out." I nodded, my heart pounding with a mix of relief and determination. "Thank you. I won't let you down." As the meeting adjourned, Ethan turned to me, a small smile on his face. "We did it." I felt a surge of gratitude and hope. Yes, we did. But this is just the beginning. There's still a lot of work to be done. He nodded, his eyes filled with resolve. "I'm ready." As we walked out of the boardroom, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The stakes were higher than ever, but I was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. This was my fight, and I wasn't going to back down. The air in the office was electric with tension. It had been a week since the board meeting, and the project was in full swing. Ethan and I had been working around the clock, but the pressure was relentless. Every step forward felt like walking a tightrope over a pit of vipers. One afternoon, as I was buried in spreadsheets, my phone buzzed with a message from Claire. "Richard wants to see you. Now." I took a deep breath, bracing myself for whatever storm was coming. Richard's office was a fortress of intimidation, with its dark wood paneling and imposing desk. He sat behind it, his expression unreadable. "Hannah," he began, his voice deceptively calm, "I've reviewed your progress on the project. It's impressive, but not enough." My heart sank. "What do you mean?" He leaned forward, his eyes cold. "I need results, not promises. If you can't deliver, I'll have no choice but to replace you." I clenched my fists, fighting to keep my composure. "We're on track, Richard. You have my word." "Your word means nothing to me," he snapped. "I want proof." Before I could respond, the door burst open, and Marianne stormed in, her face flushed with anger. "Richard, this has gone too far." He looked at her, his expression hardening. "This is none of your concern, Marianne. It is my concern when you're tearing this family apart," she shouted, turning to me. "Hannah, You have to understand. Richard is doing this to protect the company, but he's lost sight of what's important. I felt a surge of conflicting emotions. Marianne's words were unexpected, and I didn't know whether to trust her. What are you saying? I'm saying, she continued, her voice trembling, that Richard is making a mistake. Ethan isn't ready to take over, and pushing you out will only hurt everyone. Richard's face darkened. Enough, Marianne. This is business, not a family matter. She glared at him, her eyes blazing. No, Richard. This is personal. You've let your ambition cloud your judgment. I stood there, caught between their warring words, feeling the weight of their expectations crushing me. This was the most significant crisis yet, and I had to navigate it carefully. Suddenly, Ethan appeared in the doorway, his face pale. Dad, Mom, stop. This isn't helping. Richard turned to him, his expression icy. What do you want, Ethan? Ethan took a deep breath, his voice steady. I want to fix this. Hannah and I have a plan, but we need your support. Richard's eyes narrowed. And why should I trust you? Because, Ethan said, his voice breaking, I believe in Hannah. She's the best person for this job, and you know it. The room fell silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Richard looked between us, his face a mask of controlled fury. Fine, he said finally, his voice like steel. You have one last chance. But if you fail, it's over. With that, he turned and left, leaving us standing in stunned silence. Marian looked at me, her eyes filled with a strange mix of hope and desperation. Don't let him win, Hannah, she whispered before following Richard out. Ethan and I stood there, the weight of the world on our shoulders. We have to make this work, he said, his voice trembling. I nodded, my resolve hardening. We will. The next few days were a blur of frantic activity. We worked late into the night, refining every detail of the project, pushing ourselves to the limit. The pressure was immense, but failure was not an option. One evening, as we were wrapping up another long day, Ethan turned to me, his face etched with worry. Hannah, there's something you need to know. I looked at him, my heart pounding. What is it? He took a deep breath, his voice barely above a whisper. Dad's been embezzling funds from the company. I found the evidence. My mind reeled. This was the revelation that could change everything. Are you sure? He nodded, his eyes filled with fear. Yes. If this gets out, it could destroy the company. I felt a surge of conflicting emotions. This was the most significant crisis yet, and it pushed me to my limit. I had to decide. Expose Richard and risk everything, or find another way to save the company and my career. As I stood there, the weight of the decision pressing down on me, I knew one thing for sure. This was my fight, and I wasn't going to back down. The stakes were higher than ever, but I was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The revelation of Richard's embezzlement hung over me like a storm cloud. Ethan and I worked tirelessly, but the weight of the secret threatened to crush us. We knew we had to act, but the risk was immense. Exposing Richard could save the company, but it could also destroy everything we had worked for. One evening, as we were finalizing the project presentation, Ethan turned to me, his face etched with worry. Hannah, we can't keep this to ourselves. We need to tell the board. I nodded, my stomach churning. I know, but we have to be careful. If we do this wrong, it could backfire. Ethan took a deep breath, his eyes filled with determination. We'll do it right. We'll gather all the evidence and present it at the board meeting. They have to know the truth. The days leading up to the board meeting were a blur of frantic activity. We worked late into the night, compiling evidence and preparing our presentation. The pressure was immense, but failure was not an option. Finally, the day of the board meeting arrived. As we entered the conference room, the tension was palpable. Richard sat at the head of the table, his expression cold and unreadable. The board members took their seats, their eyes flicking between us with curiosity and suspicion. Ethan and I exchanged a glance, and I took a deep breath, steeling myself. This was it, our moment of truth. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, my voice steady. We have a critical issue to discuss. Over the past few weeks, we have uncovered evidence of financial misconduct within the company. The room fell silent, the board members' expressions shifting to shock and concern. Richard's face darkened, but he said nothing. Ethan stepped forward, his voice firm. We have evidence that Richard has been embezzling funds from the company. We've compiled the documentation and are prepared to present it. The board members murmured among themselves, their eyes wide with disbelief. Richard stood up, his face contorted with rage. "This is absurd," he shouted. "How dare you accuse me of such a thing?" "We have the evidence," I said, my voice unwavering, "and we believe it's in the best interest of the company to address this issue immediately." Richard's eyes blazed with fury. "You think you can take me down? You're nothing without me." The room erupted into chaos, the board members shouting over each other. I felt a surge of panic, but Ethan squeezed my hand, grounding me. "Order!" one of the senior board members shouted, banging a gavel on the table. "We need to review the evidence before making any decisions." Ethan and I presented the documentation, outlining the financial discrepancies and tracing them back to Richard. The board members examined the evidence, their expressions growing more serious with each passing minute. Finally, the senior board member looked up, his face grim. "This is damning evidence. Richard, do you have anything to say in your defense?" Richard's face was a mask of controlled fury. "This is a setup. They're trying to undermine me and take control of the company." The board member shook his head. "The evidence speaks for itself. I'm afraid we have no choice but to suspend you pending a full investigation." Richard's face twisted with rage. "You can't do this. I built this company." The board member's expression was resolute. "Our decision is final. You are hereby suspended, effective immediately." Richard stormed out of the room, leaving us in stunned silence. The board members turned to us, their expressions a mix of gratitude and concern. "Thank you for bringing this to our attention," the senior board member said. "We will conduct a thorough investigation and ensure that justice is served." As the meeting adjourned, I felt a wave of relief and exhaustion. We had done it. We had exposed Richard and saved the company. But the battle was far from over. Ethan and I walked out of the conference room, the weight of the past weeks lifting off our shoulders. "We did it," he said, his voice filled with a mix of triumph and exhaustion. "Yes, we did," I replied, feeling a sense of accomplishment. "But there's still a lot of work to be done." As we left the office, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The stakes had never been higher, but I was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. This was my fight, and I wasn't going to back down. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. The board launched a full investigation into Richard's embezzlement, and the company was in a state of upheaval. But through it all, I felt a sense of determination and resolve. This was my chance to prove myself, and I was ready to seize it. As I stood in my office looking out over the city, I felt a sense of hope and possibility. The road ahead was uncertain, but I knew one thing for sure. I was ready to face whatever came next. This was my moment, and I wasn't going to let anyone take it away from me. The boardroom was tense as the final decision about Richard's fate loomed. The investigation had confirmed his embezzlement, and the board was ready to make their ruling. I stood at the back of the room, my heart pounding, knowing that this moment would define the future. Not just for the company, but for everyone involved. Richard sat at the head of the table, his face a mask of defiance. Marianne was beside him, her expression a mix of anger and sadness. Ethan stood next to me, his hand gripping mine tightly. This was it, the climax of everything we had fought for. The senior board member cleared his throat, bringing the room to silence. After thorough investigation and deliberation, the board has decided to terminate Richard Thompson from his position as CEO, effective immediately. A murmur of shock rippled through the room. Richard's face contorted with rage. "You can't do this. I built this company." The board member's expression remained resolute. "Your actions have jeopardized the integrity of this company. We have no choice." Marianne's eyes filled with tears. "Richard, please." But Richard stood up, his eyes blazing. "This isn't over. You will all regret this." He stormed out of the room, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. Marianne followed him, her shoulders slumped in defeat. The board members turned to me, their expressions a mix of gratitude and uncertainty. "Hannah," the senior board member said, "we need strong leadership now more than ever. We would like to offer you the position of interim CEO." I felt a surge of emotions, relief, pride, and a deep sense of responsibility. "Thank you. I accept." The room erupted in applause, and Ethan hugged me tightly. "You did it, Hannah. You saved the company." I smiled, feeling a sense of accomplishment. "We did it, Ethan. Together." The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Taking on the role of CEO was daunting, but I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I threw myself into the work, determined to steer the company towards a brighter future. Ethan and I worked closely, our relationship mending as we faced the challenges together. He had shown a side of himself I hadn't seen in years, capable, supportive, and genuinely committed to making things right. One evening, as we were wrapping up another long day, Ethan turned to me, his expression serious. "Hannah, I know things have been difficult between us, but I want to make it work. I want to be the partner you deserve." I looked at him, feeling a mix of hope and caution. "Ethan, we've been through so much. It's going to take time to rebuild trust." He nodded, his eyes filled with sincerity. "I know, but I'm willing to put in the effort." "I love you, Hannah." I felt a tear slip down my cheek. "I love you too, Ethan. Let's take it one step at a time." As we embraced, I felt a sense of closure. The past had been tumultuous, but the future was filled with possibility. Weeks turned into months, and the company began to thrive under my leadership. The project we had worked so hard on was a success, and the board's confidence in me grew. I felt a sense of empowerment and fulfillment I hadn't experienced in years. One afternoon, as I was reviewing reports in my office, Marianne walked in. She looked tired, but there was a softness in her eyes. "Hannah, I wanted to thank you," she began, her voice trembling, "for everything. You've shown incredible strength and integrity." I nodded, feeling a mix of emotions. "Thank you, Marianne. It's been a difficult journey, but I believe we're all stronger for it." She smiled, a hint of sadness in her eyes. "Richard and I are moving away. We need to start fresh, away from all of this." I felt a pang of sympathy. "I wish you both the best." As she left, I felt a sense of peace. The conflicts that had once seemed insurmountable had been resolved, and I was ready to embrace the future. Standing at the window, looking out over the city, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. The journey had been long and challenging, but I had emerged stronger, more resilient, and truly in control of my life. This was my moment, my new beginning, and I was ready to face whatever came next, with confidence and courage.